Emma. Dr. Hertz's sharp voice cut through my haze. Are you still with us? Who am I explaining this to? Show me what you're drawing there. Maybe you're not a sociology major but an artist. Dr. Hertz grabbed my notebook from my hands. It had been a month since the accident. I still didn't know what else to call that horror that happened to us, and I was still in a trance, unable to concentrate on lectures, constantly drawing these strange patterns. I'd used up 3 pens completely. My wrist ached, but I couldn't stop. Emma, do you even understand what this is? Dr. Hertz addressed me with something between surprise, horror, and incomprehension. I guiltily shook my head, staring at the floor. He said these are quantum Feynman diagrams. But not just any diagrams. These show particle interactions in hyper-complex geometric space. This is graduate-level theoretical physics, Emma. I had some physics courses before I switched to sociology, but some of these structures are completely beyond my understanding. The classroom went silent. My classmates turned to stare at me like I'd grown a second head. Where did you learn to draw multidimensional fractal structures? These geometric progressions. This is advanced mathematical physics that takes years to understand. I felt my cheeks burning. I don't know, Dr. Hertz. I just draw them. They feel right somehow. He continued to bombard me with questions, not believing that I was drawing these damn diagrams unconsciously. As I already said, it all started a month ago, and these strange drawings aren't the only reminder of that event, which I can barely even remember, though some memories are gradually surfacing. But let me start from the beginning. I'm Emma Morrison. I'm 19 years old, and until recently I was just an ordinary second-year sociology student at the University of Southern Maine. Until recently, I was also a chronic asthmatic with a severe form of the disease that required constant medical supervision and limited every aspect of my life. My father, Dr. James Morrison, worked as a pulmonologist at Maine Medical Center for 30 years. He specialized in complex cases of respiratory diseases, and my asthma had been his personal professional challenge ever since I was diagnosed at age 5. Every 3 months he would give me a complete examination, spirometry, chest x-rays, blood tests for inflammatory markers. He had an entire folder of my medical data that grew thicker each year. Emma, your FEV1 is only 65% of normal, he told me during my last examination in August, studying the results of my pulmonary function tests. This means your airways are significantly constricted. We need to increase your budesonide dose and add montelukast to your treatment regimen. I was taking 4 different medications twice a day. An inhaled corticosteroid, a long-acting bronchodilator, an anti-leukotriene drug, and I carried salbutamol for emergency situations. Attacks happened 2 to 3 times a week, especially at night. I would wake up feeling like I was breathing through a thin straw, gasping for air and frantically reaching for the inhaler on my nightstand. Physical activity was limited. Climbing the stairs to the 3rd floor of my dormitory left me breathless for 10 minutes. I couldn't play sports. Even long walks caused shortness of breath. My classmates had gotten used to the fact that I always carried a backpack full of medications and needed frequent breaks during any physical exertion, but last year Dad took early retirement at 58. After decades of working within sterile hospital walls, he suddenly discovered a passion for fishing. He bought a used fishing boat called North Star, a 40-foot vessel with a cabin and all the necessary equipment for multi-day trips at sea. Sea air is good for the lungs, he would convince me. Salt vapors have mucolytic properties, they help thin mucus. Plus, there are no urban allergens and pollutants. Mom was initially against my participation in Dad's fishing expeditions. James, what if she has a severe attack in the middle of the ocean? You know how far you go from shore. But Dad insisted with professional confidence. I'm a doctor, Linda. I have more experience treating asthma than half the emergency room physicians. Besides, we're taking a portable nebulizer and a complete set of emergency medications. Our golden retriever Goldie also became a permanent crew member. The dog was already 8 years old and loved water no less than Dad did. On the boat, she had her own spot at the stern, where she could watch the fishing gear and bark at seagulls. In mid-September, Dad suggested a 3-day fishing trip off the coast of Bar Harbor, far enough to reach deep water areas where tuna could be found, but not so far as to completely lose contact with shore. Emma, the sea conditions are perfect, he said, checking the weather forecast on his phone. Wave height less than 3 feet. Moderate northeast wind, excellent visibility. Plus, I want to test the new fish finder in the area of Platts Bank. I hesitated. 3 days on a boat meant 3 days without access to proper medical care if something went wrong. But sea trips really did help my breathing. The salt air somehow soothed my inflamed airways. The first day passed peacefully enough. Dad worked his lines while Goldie dozed in the sun, and I felt better than I had in months. We anchored near Platt's Bank as evening approached, planning to try for tuna at dawn. But as darkness fell, something changed. The water beneath us began to glow, not the gentle phosphorescence of plankton, but a harsh, clinical light that pulsed in perfect geometric patterns. "Dad," I called, but he was already staring at the water, transfixed. The light intensified, and suddenly the ocean erupted. A massive disc-shaped object broke the surface, water cascading off its metallic hull in sheets. It was silent, completely, impossibly silent, and that silence was more terrifying than any sound could have been. Goldie looked toward the disc for a moment, then simply collapsed to the deck as if she'd fallen into the deepest sleep imaginable. Dad reached for the radio, but his movements became sluggish, dreamlike. "Emma," he gasped, then crumpled. The disc hovered above us, casting that terrible light. I tried to scream, tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. Darkness closed in. Then I was somewhere else entirely. I came to lying face down on a surface that felt like ice-covered metal. The cold burned through my clothes, through my skin, straight into my bones. I tried to move, to lift my head, but my body was completely paralyzed. I could feel everything, every sensation magnified to excruciating clarity, but I couldn't move so much as a finger. Complete darkness surrounded me. I strained to open my eyes wider, desperate to see something, anything, but there was nothing. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. My ears felt clogged, as if filled with water from a deep dive. Through this muffled barrier, I could hear strange sounds, wet, slapping noises, like something large moving through thick liquid, and voices if they were voices, croaking, warbling sounds that might have been communication but sounded nothing like any human language. Terror consumed me. Tears and mucus streamed down my face uncontrollably, pooling beneath my cheek on the freezing surface. I was sobbing, but no sound came out. Then I felt them. Hands, if they were hands, touching my back. Cold, with too many joints, fingers that were too long and moved with surgical precision. They pressed against my spine, my ribs, my shoulders, methodically examining every inch of me. I wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything, but I was trapped in my own paralyzed body. The touching became more invasive. Something sharp pierced between my shoulder blades, not painful exactly, but wrong, violating. I could feel them working, doing something to me, but through the waterlogged sensation in my ears, I couldn't make sense of the sounds they made to each other. More instruments joined the first, cold metal objects that hummed with their own energy. The wet slapping sounds grew more frequent, punctuated by those croaking voices discussing something in their incomprehensible language. Something entered my body. I could feel it moving inside me, but I didn't understand what it was or what they were doing. The sensation was alien, terrifying, completely beyond my experience. I don't know how long I lay there in that perfect darkness, tears streaming, unable to move or understand what was happening to me. Time had no meaning in that place. Then, suddenly, I was back on the boat. "Emma, hold on." Dad shouted into the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is North Star requesting immediate medical evacuation." The real nightmare was just beginning. The Coast Guard found us 4 hours later, drifting about 12 miles off Bar Harbor. Dad was throwing up over the side when they pulled alongside, and I was lying unconscious on the deck, breathing so shallowly they thought I was dead. I have no idea what happened, Dad told the paramedics as they loaded me onto a stretcher. We were fishing, I remember anchoring for the night, and then, nothing. I woke up nauseous as hell, and Emma was like this. He looked genuinely confused, scared even. As a doctor, he was used to being in control of medical situations, but finding his own daughter unconscious with no memory of how it happened clearly shook him. They airlifted me to Maine Medical Center, where Dad had worked for 30 years. Within hours, I was in the pulmonology ward under the care of his former colleagues, who treated my case with the kind of intensive attention usually reserved for medical mysteries. "Her airway inflammation is severe," Dr. Patterson explained to Dad while reviewing my chest x-rays. "We're seeing extensive bronchial constriction, mucus plugging in the lower airways, and elevated eosinophil counts suggesting a massive allergic response to something." For 3 days, they ran me through every procedure in the asthma treatment playbook. Dad stayed by my bedside the entire time. "Emma, your inflammatory markers are off the charts," he said, studying the latest blood work. "Your C-reactive protein is elevated. Your IgE levels are through the roof. It's like your immune system went haywire." On the third day, I woke up feeling worse than I had since the boat. Something was moving inside my chest. Not just congestion, but something alive, writhing through my bronchial tubes like it was trying to claw its way out. I bolted upright, gasping, and stumbled toward the bathroom as waves of nausea hit me. The feeling intensified with each step. Whatever was in there was bigger than I'd imagined, pressing against my ribs from the inside, making my entire torso feel like it might split open. I barely made it to the sink before the most violent coughing fit of my life seized me. It felt like my lungs were turning themselves inside out. I doubled over, hands gripping the sink as my body convulsed. Then, with one final, wrenching spasm, something huge shot out of my throat and landed in the basin with a wet thud. I stared in horror at the gray mass writhing in the sink. It was enormous, nearly the size of a tennis ball, and had the consistency of thick mucus mixed with something fibrous, almost organic. The surface rippled and pulsed as if it had its own heartbeat. Before I could lean closer to examine it, the thing began dissolving. Not slowly, like normal mucus, but rapidly, as if it were made of some unstable material that couldn't exist outside my body. Within seconds, it had liquefied completely and swirled down the drain, leaving only a faint metallic smell behind. The relief was immediate and absolute. I straightened up, drew in a deep breath, and realized I could fill my lungs completely for the first time in years. No wheeze, no restriction, no burning, just pure, effortless breathing. Whatever had been living inside me was finally gone. But as I stood there marveling at my suddenly perfect respiration, a chill ran down my spine. What exactly had I just expelled? And why did I have the unsettling feeling that it had served its purpose before leaving me? But at home, something else awaited. My fingernails were growing faster than they ever had. I had to trim them every other day instead of once a week. When I mentioned this to Dad, he said it was probably the steroids affecting my metabolism. Standing in my bathroom mirror, I noticed faint lines under each arm, 4 tiny circular scars half hidden by my bra straps. They were pale and flat, like puncture wounds that had taken months to fade. Months, because their edges were no longer pink but aged, as if they'd healed long ago. A few weeks passed in a blur of normality, until one evening while washing off the day's grime, I caught a scent of salt and ozone. My vision flickered to the shower floor, and suddenly, I remembered the water's pulsing glow. My heart hammered as my ears filled with wet, slapping noises and those strange croaks I'd heard when I was wherever I was. I staggered out of the shower, my legs trembling. A wave of heat swept through me, and my mind flooded with a montage of vivid fragments. The disc rising, the blinding beam, the cold metal surface beneath my face. It hit me with the force of a tidal wave. What I'd dismissed as hallucination was real. The USO. The glowing ring. I ran into the living room, still wet and wild-eyed, to find Dad reading in his recliner. "Dad," I gasped. "You remember, don't you? The lights. The disc." He looked up, color draining from his face. His hand clutched the armrest. "I remember," he whispered, voice shaking. "I saw it too. But I told myself it was just moonlight reflecting in the water. I'm a doctor. I had to believe there was a medical explanation." Tears sprung to my eyes. For the first time, we shared the same terror and wonder instead of denial. The memory was back, and there was no turning it off. Dad set down his book with trembling hands and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Part relief, part terror. "Emma, I remember more than I told you. So much more that I've been trying to convince myself never happened." He walked to his study and returned with a leather journal I'd never seen before. "I've been writing everything down since we got back. Every detail that came back to me, no matter how impossible it seemed." "Dad, what else do you remember?" His voice dropped to barely a whisper. After they took you, I was conscious but paralyzed on the deck. I could see everything, Emma. That disc hovering above us, completely silent. And I saw them bring you back." My heart stopped. "You saw them bring me back." Hours later, maybe 4, maybe 5. Time felt strange. You were floating. Literally floating in a beam of light back down to the deck. Your body was limp, unconscious, but you were breathing. Then the disc just vanished like it was never there. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Dad's face crumpled. Because I'm a scientist, Emma. I've spent 30 years treating patients based on evidence on measurable phenomena. How could I accept that my daughter had been taken by something that defies every law of physics I know? I kept telling myself it was trauma, hallucinations from some kind of medical emergency. But you saw the physical evidence, my recovery. That's when I started writing everything down, because as a physician, I couldn't deny what happened to your body. Over the following weeks, we became a team of two, obsessively researching what had happened to me. Dad's medical background proved invaluable as we dove into scientific literature about unexplained medical recoveries while I scoured the internet for similar experiences. We discovered I wasn't alone, not even close. Listen to this, I said one evening, playing an audio clip from a podcast Dad had found. A woman's voice, shaky but determined, described an experience that made our blood run cold. The gray mass I coughed up was enormous, bigger than a golf ball. It dissolved before I could examine it properly, but afterward, my chronic bronchitis was completely gone. Gone after 15 years of constant medication. Dad leaned forward. That's the third case we found of respiratory healing after contact. It can't be coincidence. We filled notebooks with testimonies from abduction support groups, medical anomaly forums, and obscure research papers. The pattern was unmistakable. People reporting contact with non-human intelligence frequently experienced inexplicable medical improvements, particularly in chronic conditions. Emma, look at this, Dad said, showing me a research paper from a defunct government program. Documented cases of people developing mathematical abilities they never had before, artistic talents appearing overnight after the unexplained missing time episodes. The geometric drawings I'd been compulsively creating suddenly made more sense. I wasn't just a victim, I was part of something larger, something that had been happening to people for decades, maybe centuries. They're changing people, I whispered. But why? Dad asked, his medical training warring with the impossible evidence before us. And what are you becoming? The changes weren't dramatic, just persistent and unsettling. 3 weeks after our conversation, I noticed my body temperature had dropped. Not dangerously, but consistently. Dad checked multiple times. 96. 8 degrees Fahrenheit instead of my usual 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Maybe the medication affected your metabolism, he suggested, but we both knew I wasn't taking any medication anymore. More disturbing was my reaction to certain sounds. High-frequency noises, microwave beeps, smoke detectors, even some car alarms, caused intense headaches and nausea. I had to leave the dining hall when the industrial dishwashers started their cycle. The school nurse thought it might be tinnitus, but hearing tests showed my hearing was actually sharper than normal. Then came the taste disturbances. Foods I'd loved my entire life suddenly tasted metallic or rotten. Coffee, chocolate, even tap water had an underlying chemical flavor that made me gag. Dad ran tests on our water supply, checked for medication side effects, consulted with ENT specialists. Everything came back normal. The strangest change was my relationship with animals. Goldie, who had always been devoted to me, now kept her distance. She wouldn't come near me willingly, and when forced to, she trembled and whined softly. Other dogs reacted similarly, backing away, refusing treats from my hands. Emma, look at this, Dad said one evening, showing me a research paper. Some abduction accounts mention animals avoiding the person afterward. They theorize it might be related to electromagnetic changes in the body. We started documenting everything. My lower body temperature, the sound sensitivity, the taste changes, even Goldie's behavior. The medical community might not have explanations, but the pattern was undeniable. Something had fundamentally altered my physiology in subtle but persistent ways that defied conventional understanding. I was still me, but somehow different at a cellular level that modern medicine couldn't quite identify or explain. The worst part was the water. I couldn't go near the ocean anymore. Even the harbor made me physically ill. Bath water felt threatening, and I switched to quick showers only. Dad noticed I was drinking less too, barely enough to stay hydrated. When he suggested we visit the boat to check on it, I had a panic attack in the parking lot. My drawings evolved in disturbing ways. The flat, geometric patterns weren't enough anymore. I found myself trying to draw three-dimensional structures on paper, frustrated that I couldn't capture the depth I somehow knew they were supposed to have. I started making crude sculptures from clay, then graduated to wire frames, trying desperately to build what my mind insisted I needed to create. "Emma, these look like architectural blueprints," Dad said, studying my latest attempts. But for what? I didn't know. I just knew they had to be built upward, outward, in dimensions that paper couldn't contain. My basic needs changed too. Sleep became optional. 4 hours felt like plenty. Food lost most of its appeal. I ate mechanically, just enough to function. Dad worried I was developing an eating disorder, but it wasn't psychological. I simply needed less of everything.